President Trump took the oath of office on Monday, gave 2 inaugural speeches, and then got to it. He signed 26 executive orders that first day alone. Trump took action to end birthright citizenship, close the border, declare an energy emergency, and investigate what he claimed was the weaponization of government during the Biden years. So, Nina, what are your expectations for Trump, and Trump 2, I should say, and what about the executive actions? Which stands out to you?
Well, to the second part of your question as to what stands out for me is the fact that these executive orders, taken as a whole, are stunningly unrelated to the concerns that voters identified as their number 1 and number 2 top concerns during the run up to the election. Those number 1 and number 2 top concerns were inflation and the cost of living. But if you look at where Trump has spent most of his energy, and that is in taking down DEI, you'll notice that that executive order is extremely detailed in terms of laying out the targeted programs, laying out the benchmarks that are to be met, the dates by which they are to be met, and even the agencies. However, when you pivot to look at the executive order that is titled Emergency Price Relief, what you see is instead of the 8 pages for the DEI executive order, only 4 pages for this one. And here's the rub. Folded into, just sort of bunched into that one executive order for price relief is basically a mandate to lower prices for health care, for housing, to deal with home appliances, job creation, all again in 4 pages with no specificity as to how it's to be done, when, by whom, and where.
You know, inflation is not something you can actually control by executive
order. I would argue that the most important executive order was the one that he didn't make on that first day, and that is related to the economy, and that was he had promised that he would immediately put tariffs on 25% on Mexico and Canada, and at least 10% on China, and he didn't do that. And those would be inflationary. I'm at least a little bit encouraged that he's postponed doing this. He now says he may do it as of February 1st, but those are, if he had followed through on that, most economists argue that that would make inflation even worse.
Right, but to your point, Dave, I agree it's going to take time, but here's what he could have done, is he could have spelled out relief for farmers and for the agricultural industry in order to deal with lower food prices. But instead, you know what he did regarding farmers is he cut off funds to black farmers in particular. So no, he's not going to build Rome in a day, but he certainly could have focused on the first step.
Well, what about, Anirban, the idea of the sort of the limits of presidential authority? I mean, he's pushing the boundaries.
Yes, so you know, this has been happening for a long time, right? There are several books that have been written about it, that over time, you know, the separation of powers that have kind of been derogated towards a more kind of an electoral dictatorship, right? In where the executive power has become more and more important and more expansive in American politics. And you can see that, right? Like ruling through executive orders rather than creating laws. And a couple of things that I was really worried about is one that, you know, restoring this special category of federal workers called Schedule F, where these federal workers would not have any job protections or that were enjoyed by career civil servants. They will not have whistleblowing protection and so on. Second thing that I really worried about was, the suspension of the refugee admissions program completely, right? So at that rate, I don't know, the joke is maybe the French want their statue back. You know what statue I'm talking about here, I suppose. But, and then lastly, the executive order of LBJ that allowed
President Johnson
that made federal contractors and subcontractors comply with anti-discrimination laws and allow affirmative action for women and minority groups. They had to produce detailed reports for this compliance. That is completely gone. So what I'm seeing is derogation of the American constitutional order towards a more executive branch power grab by the executive branch. That has been happening, but this has more kind of a fascist undertones, especially when you see this interesting order that he says that if the federal employees see that their colleagues are disobeying the DEI order, then they should tell on their colleagues, right? So this is kind of this Gestapo-style mass surveillance that you start telling on your own colleagues, or you will be penalized for not telling on them. So these are the kind of stuff that is worrying for me.
Let's get Tara in on this. Tara.
Well, one of the things that concerns me is that he also, withdrew from the Paris Accords, which we knew he was going to do, but he's cut off funding for the UN Climate Organization, and it's sort of with the assumption that the efforts to try and address climate change, which, of course, he doesn't believe really is happening, actually were beginning to have some positive impact. And, support for that worldwide was at an all-time high. And so, in a sense, my concern is that America will take a step back, which is, of course, what he wants, from trying to address climate change. I'm also concerned about our withdrawal from the World Health Organization because that impacts not simply things like the pandemic, but that impacts all sorts of sharing of scientific information. Now, he's doing this under the guise of saying, okay, I'm going to force other countries to pay more and support the World Health Organization. But he's looking at the economic side of it, or at least his advisors are looking at the economic side of it, not looking at the worldwide impact in terms of scientific knowledge and dealing with what scientists have made very clear are going to be ongoing pandemics as diseases morph, et cetera.
And we do have a potential epidemic anyway right now with bird flu, which could be around the corner.
I also think it's important to mention something that he said he would do that he did, and that is the pardoning of almost all of the January 6th rioters. New York Times website has a great piece where they have video of many of the specific individuals that have been pardoned, showing them beating, tasing, dragging police officers. This is disgraceful, and I think we should not forget.
That may come back to
many groups, like organizations of police, are now very upset that that backed him and endorsed him, are upset that he's gone through and done this, and some Republicans also are unhappy.
Nina?
Yeah, I want to go back to something that Anirban talked about, and that is the consolidation of power within the executive branch. That actually started during the Roosevelt years when he shifted away from Congress that was not cooperative to deal with the Great Depression to instead rely upon executive orders. But in that case, it was to do so in order to provide relief directly to the people. This is very different, not only from prior presidents, but even in the area of affirmative action, the revocation of Johnson's Executive Order 11246, that was striking because no other Republican president did that. Nixon, in fact, expanded upon it. Reagan, although he talked about being opposed to affirmative action, was really opposed to quotas and could have revoked 11246 as well. So this is stunning. I think all of this amounts to this. Not just providing red meat to the base, but in fact providing black and brown meat to the base. The question is that going to satisfy their appetite? Is it going to put food on the table and gas in the tank? I don't think so, but maybe him playing his card this early on is going to show that that's the case.